are always biased towards themselves, right? And you just realize that, okay, it's quite evidence that they have a bias. And I even told you that most parents are very biased about their own opinion of their own children, right? Even though they probably know their children better than anybody else on the planet. All right, factual support. Does the source offer factual support for the position taken or simply state personal opinions as facts? So again, if I'm a doctor and I say vaping is actually better than cigarette smoking, it's less harmful, right? So that's my medical opinion as an expert in the field. But the question is, do I actually have any facts though that prove what I'm claiming, right? So my expertise is an opinion. Remember, opinions are not facts. And that's like gives me some credibility. But then you ask yourself also, are there any facts that back up that expert opinion, right? So if I told you that like drugs cause homelessness, how many of you would be like, yeah, that sounds reasonable? And then you can definitely find some facts. You can find people and examples of people who are homeless because of drug use, right? The interesting thing is, if I just stop to share, let me just look that up real quickly. Like, like how important is homelessness? Like, how much is drug use? I'd be love to, but are homeless people drug addicts? Ooh, see what gets predicted by Google there. Let's see if we can find a statistic. Okay, so here's one that says there's a connection between homelessness and addiction. Just says that substance abuse is common. Okay, drug addiction and homelessness in California. Debunking the myths. So drug and alcohol abuse are often the result, not the cause. I think that's interesting. And homeless, you see a lot of research on it. In fact, here's some statistics. Right, let's see. Homelessness, addiction often occur simultaneously. And substance abuse can develop due to the stressors associated with homelessness. So that says that homelessness leads to drug use as opposed to drug use leads to homelessness. But on the other hand, addiction can also contribute to homelessness. So you see that there's kind of a reciprocal relationship there, right? So you say that you have an expert opinion on homelessness and drug addiction, but then you have some facts actually to back up the medical or expert opinion as well as just the opinion itself by itself, right? So, okay. And then we can look at evaluating internet sources of evidence, because everyone pretty much uses the internet for the research. You just saw that I use the internet, right? So we currently obtain a significant amount of the evidence we use in argument from the internet. So some people are still under the influence that if they read it on the internet, it must be accurate. But we all know that some internet sources are better than others. We need to be able to evaluate websites to obtain the best information possible. Here are two approaches to evaluating websites. And you notice that the key there to understand is you're always looking for the best information or best evidence or best research, not just the first research that you come upon. You're like, that's convenient, I'm going to use that, right? So like, think about, is this the best? All right. So you got to ask yourself who, what, when, where, and why. This is the 5 W's, really, really important. I think if you want to just be a critical thinker, anytime somebody says something to you, you think about who, what, when, where, and why, right? Okay. So like journalists are taught to answer these 5 questions when writing an article for their publication. So just kind of built into any newspaper article or journal article, right? So, to provide an accurate interpretation of events to their viewers or readers, they ask these 5 questions, and we can ask the same questions to begin discovering the level of quality of an online source. So who wrote the post? Again, what are their qualifications? What makes them maybe an expert in the field? What is actually being said in the website? How accurate is the content? You can find that some, National Enquirer does false information on purpose, like Michael Jackson is an alien type stuff, right? But it was to sell newspapers and make money, not to actually try and like really be real journalism, right? And then you also ask, when was the website's latest post? So the date matters. Recency is important. Where's the source of the post? And does the URL suggest it is from an academic source or an individual? So primary source, secondary source, who is the primary source, or what is the primary source, and why is the website published? Because some websites are there, like The Onion, it's for satire and humor. It's not actual journalistic news. CNN.com, FoxNews.com, MSNBC.com. Those are all news websites, right? BBC.com. And is the website there to inform or entertain? And then you've got a good idea of whether this is accurate, right? So anytime people tell me things, I'm generally figuring out, who's involved, what happened, when did this occur, where did it occur, and generally why, right? And then you really understand circumstances better, right? So let's talk about the CRAAP test, or the CRAP test. So CRAP is an acronym standing for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose, developed by the Merriam Library at the University of Chico State. So we basically say, is it current, right? So recent. This evidence needs to be recent. A lot of evidence, I think, pre-pandemic doesn't apply to the world anymore, because post-pandemic, the world is so different that you can't look at history, what happened before the pandemic, and then try and predict the future post-pandemic, right? Relevance doesn't matter, right? You tell me, oh, I found out that your girlfriend cheated on her taxes a couple years ago. Do I really care? Right? Is it relevant? It's true, right? But do you really, how much does it matter? How much does it sway your opinion, right? If it doesn't, then it's irrelevant, right? And if we're talking about pizza and you bring up sushi, I would say that's irrelevant. Although they're both food, but otherwise they're not connected, right? So authority, again, expertise, degree, experience, what makes them authority, right? Like, I'm your mom and whatever I say is true, or I'm your, right? That's BS authority. Authority has to be like legitimate and have, based on their expertise. Accuracy, again, you just, you don't want falseness and misinformation and stuff going out there. And then you finally have purpose. What is the purpose of this evidence, right? It's a fun fact, or is it you were trying to kind of prove this angle true, or you're just a journalist and your purpose is to try to find the information, right? So the CRAP test, trying to always apply to evidence. Is it current? Is it relevant? What's the authority behind the evidence? Is the actual evidence accurate? Don't assume it is, right? And then, like, when you read a police report, it's not always accurate, right? The cops do their best to recreate what happened based on eyewitness testimony, right, and stuff like that, like in a car accident. But they didn't witness the car accident, right? They show up like an hour later and just try and clean up the mess. And so it's like, I've read the police report sometimes, and I've actually been called as a witness and said, like, the police report is wrong. It's totally wrong, right? And this is why, and this is actually what happened that caused the car accident, because we have like a dash cam video, right? So you realize that overwhelms, just because there's a police report doesn't always make it accurate. And then again, the purpose, right? The purpose of a police report is a good one, to try and recreate what happened, so we can, like, insurance companies or whatever else, and can figure out what happened and then do the appropriate resulting actions. Checking on the domain indicator. So when you're on the internet, .com or .net or whatever you want nowadays, right? Like .us, they freed up the domain names. So you can do anything you want, whatever you want. So those are all, I don't know if I would believe them. These are all, they're not news agencies necessarily. They're there for commercial purposes, right? So newspapers want to make money on a website, clicks, right? So, and then they're advertising. So you can see that there is a financial incentive for them to put stuff on their website that makes you want to click it, right? All right. So, but .orgs are different. This is an organization. They tend to be pretty reliable. And then .edu is even better. That's an educational institution. Generally, anything on a .edu in terms of research is pretty trustworthy. And then .gov is a government state institution, and they're in the same boat. Now, think about it this way. And when you publish something, you put your money where your mouth is. Because if I publish something in a newspaper and it's wrong, I can get sued for that, right? Like when Whole Foods, they actually had this story about 10 years ago. They put up an avocado print ad, and instead of saying like $5.99, it said 59 cents per avocado. I remember people showed up saying, I want my 59-cent avocados. And they were like, no, they're $5.99 each. And then they were like, print ad. And the law says when you have a print ad and you throw it out there, you have to honor that price, right? So you put your money where your mouth is. And the internet, that's not true. But you do find that .edus, .govs, you can sue them for having misinformation on their website, because of who they are. They do have to kind of put their money where their mouth is. So I think that's a great way to understand the accuracy of evidence on the internet. Do these people actually put their money where their mouth is? Because if you publish a book saying, I was going to say the Queen of England was like a transvestite, really, right? I'm going to get sued for publishing that book because if it's false, right? If the truth is always a defense, by the way. So can I put that on the internet? Like, can I say social media, the Queen is a transvestite of England, right? You notice that I'm not putting my money where my mouth is when I'm posting stuff on the internet. A lot of times, though, when you're publishing, you are, right? And then publishing sources that publish something first and then also put it on their website. So CNN.com puts it on TV, but then also then puts it on their website, right? So you kind of see that they're putting where their money, where their mouth is. That's why there's more reliability. That doesn't guarantee that they're always telling the correct news, right? All right, so using evidence. We need to build evidence for our student Congress #1 and find out, do we support universal health care or not? And it should be based on the evidence, not your personal feelings or your religion, right? So because we're critical thinkers, we're gonna do like a cost benefit analysis. We're gonna look at all the costs of universal health care and all the benefits of universal health care compared to the status quo, and then we'll make a decision. So page 125, chapter 6. So #1, to establish conclusive proof for your position, we need conclusive proof is using evidence that is strong and convincing enough to override any objections to it, right? So if I told you Michael Jackson was a pedophile, a lot of Michael Jackson fans are like, boo, no way. Well, I'm going to show you evidence that's so convincing it'll override any questions or objections you have to it, right? So we do know this in the case, by the way. He slept with underage boys in the same bed, right? We know that for a fact, that they actually stayed in the room, that he would actually give them wine, Jesus juice, I think is what he called it, to underage kids, it's also crime. We know that one of the moms who her son was involved, actually got one-way tickets to Brazil, and she had like $500,000 in cash in her luggage. And a lot of people were like, that's Michael Jackson hush money right there, right? Neverland in Santa Barbara. And we do have some eyewitnesses. So Macaulay Culkin, when he was doing Home Alone, him and Mike Jackson were really good friends when he was young, by the way. And they've asked Macaulay Culkin, right? Like, yo, and let's go look at some research. If I go over to Macaulay Culkin, I don't know how to spell his name exactly, and Michael Jackson, there you go, it pops up on the internet really fast. So in 2005, Jackson was charged with intoxicating and molesting a 13-year-old boy, but was later acquitted. Macaulay Culkin actually testified in Michael Jackson's defense in the case, right? Which was actually the last time he saw Michael Jackson before he actually died in 2009. Now he's a grown-ass adult and lives in France. That's, I think, the last thing I read. So like you can see in this Esquire article in 2020, he talks about this, right? He's because Culkin is godfather to Jackson's daughter, Paris, right? Who he actually remains really, really close. And you can see what he's got an insider perspective about what happened 11 years after Michael Jackson passed away. So you can read that on your own if you're interested and see that, that's pretty compelling testimonial evidence, right? But there's a bias. Does anybody want to predict the bias? He's Michael Jackson's friend, right? And like, do friends protect each other? Yeah, right? So but anyhow, you can read the article yourself. He says nothing happened, but he does verify that, like, he saw people go in the room, close the door, but you don't know what happened in there, right? So, all right. Often the argumentative environment will define what type of evidence is needed to establish your arguments, to define the threshold of that environment, right? Are you in court? Are you just having an argument between friends? Anybody ever do that where you're like, you're like, your friend's like, this is true. And you're like, no, it's this, right? And you're always like, ask, Siri, or ask Google, or ask Alexa. And then you're like, oh, so you kind of, figure out who actually is right. And I had students, when I met face-to-face in class, I would give facts and statistics all the time. And students would be like, checking it out on their phones, because they were like, I don't know if that's true. And then they're like, oh, it is. And by the way, as a professor, you don't want to be stating stuff that's not true, because students will catch you, because you've got smartphones everywhere. So, for example, fingerprints at the crime scene may be conclusive proof needed to find a person guilty of that crime. For scientists to prove a hypothesis, they need experiments to reach a 95% certainty threshold. So that's scientific threshold of proof. That is, they need to be 95% certain of the results. If the experiment by the scientist reaches this level, this would be conclusive proof. So if I add baking soda to vinegar, you get smoke, like the vapor they do at concerts. Shoot, I forgot what it's called. Anyhow, some of you concert goers or ravers would know that, huh? And so, yeah, you just, and what I do is I mix it 100 times, and every single times I mix vinegar and baking soda, you get massive CO2 release, which comes in the form of this harmless kind of smoke looking thing, right? It's not like carbon burning smoke. It's just that concert effect thing. Kind of what happens in a fire extinguisher too. Fire extinguishers are compressed CO2. So when you press the little thing, it shoots out this, because fire needs oxygen. So you just throw massive amounts of CO2 and it can kind of put it out. So anyway, number 2, let's establish circumstantial proof. So circumstantial proof is, I never saw you kill that person, but I know you were in the area. I knew that you had a motive to maybe harm that person. And I also know that you weren't at work and you weren't with your family. Right, but otherwise, I actually don't know where you were. And you're saying I was doing this, right? But does everybody see that's circumstantial proof? Circumstantial proof is pretty powerful, although it's pretty unfair. But anyhow, so this is where the various types of evidence are used to form a link strong enough to prove your point. Using the different types of evidence as support gives the argument the strength needed to establish the accuracy of your argument. The evidence is put together in such a manner so as to create an evidence chain, right? One bit of evidence is connected to another, and so on and so on. Each piece of evidence in and of itself is not enough to reach the threshold of your audience for accepting your argument. But taken all together, the accuracy of the claim can be established, right? So many Americans hold the incorrect view that circumstantial evidence cannot be used to convict someone in a court of law. In fact, moral convictions are based on circumstantial proof than on conclusive proof, right? So a good example might be like, I might say, hey, I think, a 9/11 attack was by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And they kind of claimed credit for that, but a lot of terrorists claim credit for that, right? So the terrorists are all dead. So we're like, okay, we got to get circumstantial proof that it was Al-Qaeda, right? So we look at their passports of the passengers who turned out to be hijackers, and they're, Middle Eastern men, mostly all from Saudi Arabia. And you start to put together that, yeah, it was Al-Qaeda, right? But we don't have we don't have eyewitness testimony. Then a guy with the Al-Qaeda t-shirt was like, woo, took over the plane, was telling everybody we're Al-Qaeda, right? It's just, we just have some circumstantial evidence. But if you link it all together, it can become pretty convincing, right? Like my children be like, oh, I didn't steal the M&Ms. And then I see an empty bag of M&Ms in their room. I see the little M&M wrappers in their room. I see like M&M stains on their teeth, right? And you just go like, all that together, you're hella guilty, right? You stole the M&Ms. And they're totally just deny it the whole time, even though they're like eating them in front of me. It's pretty hilarious, right? That's just kids. How much evidence is necessary? Well, to some extent, the amount of evidence needed depends on the degree of controversy of the claim, right? You're trying to support your credibility as an advocate. Like if you're trying to prove the earth is round, that's not that, most people agree with that, so you don't really need that much evidence, right? But if you're trying to prove that like vaccines are safe, you need lots of really good evidence. Although we've gotten to the point now where the anti-vaxxers are dogmatists, and that means that no matter what the evidence is, they're stubborn and won't change their mind, right? So how much evidence does the advocate need to present is ultimately determined by the demands of his or her target audience. It's like the audience. How much evidence does the audience need to convince, right? So like I might say, this is a good deal in my own mind. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to take it. Other people, you're going to realize that that's not always true. And you've got to look at, they might need more evidence that this is a good deal than you do, right? And so you want to make sure, so it depends on the audience, the target audience. Since evidence must ultimately be persuasive to an audience, the judge, the jury, whoever is really the arbiter of the decision, arguers must adjust their usage of evidence for maximum appeal. So an advocate must deal with one of the following audience types. So you have a friendly audience. They support your position already. They're already predisposed to granting adherence to the position. So you don't need that much evidence. They're already on your side, right? Like if I go to a 49ers game and there's all 49ers fans and I go, the 49ers are the best team, I don't need to give evidence. Everyone's gonna be like, hell yeah, right? Because they're all fans of the team. They're already on the same side as me. They already believe what I believe, right? So I don't need much evidence. If I go to an opposing stadium like a Oak or Las Vegas Raiders, and I go 49ers is the best team, they're gonna be like boo, hiss, and then that they don't believe me. So and then I need to bring evidence. We got 5 Super Bowls, we were in the last 2 NFC championships. We got, like Hall of Famers, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, Steve Young, on and on and on. Okay, so now you have a neutral audience. This is one that's made no commitment to granting adherence to the advocated viewpoint. So like, I'm not sure what I think about universal healthcare. I'm neutral. So these people are sitting on the fence. They haven't chosen a side of the fence. So wait, that's the metaphor. Waiting to see what type of support can be provided in order to move from one side to the other. The quality of the evidence used is important to this type of audience. So neutral audiences are really listening to evidence because they want to take a side, or that they may have to take a side. So they want to, make sure they make a good decision, or they make a decision based on the best evidence they can get. Now, hostile audience is one that's already opposed to your advocate's point of view. Audience members are already predisposed to reject your advocated point of view. In this case, a great deal of high quality evidence is needed to sway these existing audience members. So I actually remember my parents and I having a discussion about marijuana legalization in California, because my mom and dad were like, I think it was 2016, right there, and they were like, what happened today, like in the vote about marijuana? Because they're old school and they're generally were taught it's a bad thing. And I was like, yeah, it's now you can buy it at a store, dispensaries, and it's recreational and medical. And I remember my parents really being like, okay, kind of shocked, but then they're a little bit hostile, but I think they started learning a little bit more about it. And then they realized, like, they were like, oh, maybe I at least understand why they legalize it. I don't necessarily agree, right? And that was a big, so they were a hostile audience, and but there was some quality evidence that said, hey, there's some good things that can come out of this, debatably. And this is so they were swayed to be much more open-minded. I was actually quite shocked, because they're kind of just old school. So all right, tests of evidence, again, kind of think about the crap test too, but here we got recency, sufficiency, logical relevance, internal consistency, external consistency, right? Recency, usdebtclock.org, by the way. I'm going to show you this website quickly. Terrific website, and it's about this is our national economy in real-time numbers, which is why they're always moving. You can see our US national debt at $31 trillion. You can actually see how much they take in federal tax revenue every year, which is tax day is coming up with April 16th, 4.6 trillion. So per citizen, they take about $13,800. You can see what the corporate tax revenue is, tariffs. You can also look at the largest budget items. If you didn't know, Medicare, Medicaid is number 1 at $1.54 trillion. Social Security is number 2 at $1.268 trillion. And then the Pentagon budget, which, by the way, because of China, what's happening, we need to ramp up our military, $780 billion right now. And they're going to spend even more. Even though Biden's, a Democrat, but they've been really, the defense budget, if you didn't know, number 3, biggest chunk of the federal budget, number 3 biggest slice of the pie, if you didn't know. All right, you can look at US debt and interest. And then what's really interesting is you can look at student loan debt here at $1.78 trillion, which averages $39,870 per student. Number 2 type of debt behind that personal debt is actually credit card debt at $1.2 trillion, which averages $7,441 negative dollars per holder. So be careful of this, by the way, falling into the credit card debt thing. The student loan debt thing is also kind of a trap too. I'll make the argument that you should just be careful about how much you borrow, because you have to pay it back. US population, if you didn't know, 334 million. Median income, 35,774. You can see the median income in the year 2000, 22 years ago, 22 years and change, was only 31,000. So the median income's only gone up $400 in 22 years. Look at the median home price and how much has changed in 22 years. This tells me most Americans will never buy a home. Because look at their income. Half Americans make more, half Americans make less. Half houses cost more, half the houses cost less than this number. This does not allow you to buy a home, which causes a lot of just inequality in this country, in my personal opinion. And this is what the numbers tell me right there, if you look at this one. All right. So real-time data. You can see that literally your evidence can be 1 second old, right? So, okay, so let's go back here. I love that website, by the way. You can learn so much about the US economy by checking that way. And then I would also tell you, if you don't understand a lot of things on the website, you should learn. Because it's all about money. We call that financial literacy, by the way. If you don't have a persuasive speech topic, I like the one that we should all learn financial literacy. Learn how to learn money, talk money, so we can use and manage money. And like you maybe even put it in a class in high school. We don't have anything like that that teaches you financial. It's up to your parents to teach children finances. There is no, right, until you get to college, they can start majoring in accounting and finance, but there's nothing that teaches you from K through 12, right? So, all right. And then we also looked at sufficiency. How much evidence is enough, right? Like on a Yelp review, how many Yelp reviews do you need before you trust them, right? 50, 100, 1,000? Logical relevance, again, does it matter to you? Is it connected to the issue at hand? Internal and external consistency just means that the source or the evidence source internally, are they always saying it consistent, right? So you might see like, I'm pro-vaccine, now I'm anti-vaccine, right? That's internally inconsistent. It shows that you are not, even your own opinion is not consistent, right? And then external consistency is what you know on the outside with testing with reality. So if I say, I think vaccines are safe, and then I look at the external world, and it generally says vaccines are safe, because if you do the research, doctors and science will tell you that's true. That there seems to be a consistency, what I believe, and then what the rest of the world believes. So that's external consistency, right? And consistency is important. Think about how you want your beliefs generally to be consistent, right? Because it's kind of hard to be a hypocrite, like do something the exact opposite of what you always preach, right? That would be for most people, that'd be hard inconsistency to deal with. Okay, so all right, there are different types of misleading and false news described below by A.J. Willingham and CNN News. So we got fake news. These are the easiest to debunk, often come from known sham sites, and they're designed to look like real news outlets. They may include misleading photographs, headlines that at first read sound like they could be real, but they're not. The headline grabs your attention, right? So then there's misleading news. These are often the hardest to debunk because they often contain a kernel of truth, right? A fact, event, or quote that's been taken out of context. Look for sensational headlines that aren't supported by the information in the article. Third, we got highly partisan news. That means one-sided. A type of misleading news. This may be an interpretation of a real news event where facts are manipulated to fit an agenda, right? So you see, it's a variation of misleading news, but the reason it's misleading is there's a partisan angle going on to it, right? So I didn't see the clip yesterday, but if you didn't hear, there was a school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's really 6 people got murdered. And then the gunman / woman, because I believe they're saying that he or she was transgender. And there's a video, surveillance images have been released. 3 children and 3 administrators murdered. And it's really, really sad because Fox News was there to cover the event. And I heard, so they set up the microphone and they had the cameras on live. And this mom just ran up there and said, "Aren't you all tired of covering school shootings? What are we going to do about it? Aren't you sick and tired of this?" And then the Fox News actually was cut live, so they weren't showing, but she got on there for like 10 seconds. They were just saying that because they're very pro-gun on Fox News, right? So when they cover a school shooting, they don't blame the guns ever. Whereas you'll see a lot of other news outlets say like, "Oh, she had 2 semi-automatic weapons, and she entered the school by shooting the glass doors open with her machine gun," basically, right? Just so, or he or she, I'm not exactly sure how she was most recently identified. I believe they think that she was an alumni. So, okay. Then you have clickbait. By the way, the Fox reporter is heard at the end saying, "Yeah, I agree with you. I'm sick and tired of covering this school shooting stories." So that's a real moment, huh? It's all right. Clickbait. Yeah, they had it on live because they thought the press conference was going to start, and the mom just ran up there and grabbed the mic and started just really. It was I want to see the YouTube video because I think that it's probably there because and she said she's just a mom and she doesn't think kids should go to school and ever have to worry about getting shot. And I pretty much agree with her. Right? We worry about earthquakes, maybe fire drill, and just, it's lame that we have to do the run, hide, defend drill now. So, okay. Clickbait. This is shocking or teasing headlines of these stories trick you into clicking for more information, which may or may not live up to what was promised. Clickbait is annoying, is my personal opinion, right? Just, and I don't usually do it, but every once in a while you're like, oh, that sounds so interesting. And I was like, well, this is a bunch of BS. All right, satire. This one is tough because satire doesn't pretend to be real and serves a purpose as commentary or entertainment. I'm just joking. But if people are not familiar with the satire site, they can actually share the news as if legitimate. There is an article about a famous story on The Onion, which is a satire newspaper, right? They just publish fake stories to kind of like, some of them are really funny too, by the way. And then other people don't just hear the headline, it sounds real and just and crazy, so they share it and they don't realize The Onion is completely not true. All right. So ask yourself, has the article been debunked by a reputable fact-checking organization? There are many fact-checking organizations around the world that will help you determine the validity and accuracy of news stories. One excellent website is the International Fact-Checking Network. So I've had some students actually cite sources and then say, I went to International Fact-Checking Network and I looked at my source and it rates it like an A+. And then they actually is in their video speech. And I'm like, that's pretty awesome. Because you're saying like, I have really good evidence and sources here in my speech, right? Because you know, it's the other side's she said, I'm saying he said. How do you who's right? Well, my sources are awesome, right? That you kind of notice that if you want to figure out who won the debate, these kind of arguments separate people, right? Or separate sides. So on the website is a list of international fact-checking sites, including the most popular ones in the United States. So you've got factcheck.org, PolitiFact, Snopes, Washington Post Fact Checker, and Fact Check Georgia. So all those examples. So if you want to I'll give you a good example. So let's just go to factcheck.org real quickly myself. And I'm going to go, okay, hold on a second. How do I actually verify somebody? So let me see topics or ask articles. Yeah, this would be interesting if I knew how to use this, huh? Okay, so this is actually a website, but Annenberg Public Policy Center is the Annenberg is a school of communication, actually, which is very reputable. It's at USC in the West, and I believe the University of Pennsylvania on the East Coast. So it's two Annenberg schools. Let me just type in, I don't know, like Washington Post. Oh, why can't I type? Oh, there it is. Okay, so you can see this is an interesting article. But a lot of people say sanctuary cities. These are sanctuary cities that do not report illegal immigrants to federal authorities so they can't be deported. And so Republicans and conservatives hate them. And a lot of people say, hey, when you bring these illegals into your city, they breed crime. And you can see fact check post by Robert Farley in 2017 actually says, like, for example, Donald Trump said, sanctuary cities breed crime, right? But limited research on the effects of such policies found no evidence that lead to overall increase in crime rates, right? And U.S. Immigration and Customs, ICE, documented nearly 2,000 cases in which cities with sanctuary policies refused to honor the ICE detainers, and unauthorized immigrants then went on to commit crimes. But some law enforcement say that in the big picture, sanctuary policies actually help to reduce crime, right? So, and then Trump gave specific examples, and then they're going to counter this. The Steinle case was actually really, really relevant because it happened in San Francisco. It's really sad. In 2015, Catherine Steinle, she was walking with her father on like Pier 37, just walking, and she got shot and killed. And they realized this guy, who was a Mexican national with a felony criminal record, been deported multiple times, had been arrested, but San Francisco Sanctuary City did not give him to ICE to be deported. So he stole a gun from a cop car, which, by the way, is a no-no. Cops are never supposed to leave their guns in their car, but he got one dude left his gun in his car, and then this guy broke into it, got the gun, and he accidentally, it was like in his pocket, and they found out that he accidentally dropped the gun and then went off, and the bullet ricocheted off the ground and then hit Catherine Steinle, and she died. Like literally walking with her dad, holding her hand. She just in the middle of public, and just bullet goes right through her, and she dies in her father's hands, right? So this case, everybody was like, look, it was an illegal Mexican guy with a felony criminal record. His ass should have been deported. San Francisco didn't. And it was a great big example that everyone was citing. By the way, though, they found out that it was the Mexican national didn't get charged with murder because they found out through forensics that the bullet definitely hit the ground and then ricocheted. So he never aimed it at her, right? And it kind of convinced them that his story that he dropped the gun from his pocket and then it hit the ground and went off. And that's what happened. And then you can see that the article is pretty long. It goes through whether this is true or not. And it's just, they try and look at studies, right? So you have facts in the article that say like 2013 study found the American Sociological Review confirmed that immigration is strongly associated with less violence, right? So you have facts inside the expert opinion to counter the other not expert opinion, right? It's just Trump saying sanctuary cities are bad for crime, or breed crime was the claim, right? So, okay. Alexios Monsarlis trains fact checkers for a living. So he says it's important to have a healthy amount of skepticism. Skepticism is questioning what you are told or what you see, what you read, right? And to think, really think before sharing a piece of news. So if we were a little slower to share and retweet content purely based on the headlines, we go a good way towards combating falsehoods, right? So we kind of talked about this earlier, where you hear about a terrorist incident and you're like automatically think it's a foreign terrorist, and then the facts actually say most terrorism in America is domestic. It's by homegrown Americans who have for whatever reason. Oh, and by the way, this is back, the OP, or what they call, looks like OK, but it's actually W, a P, for it means white power. And I was just seeing this article that the white supremacist guy has been throwing the symbol out in public again. So just reading an article about that. The one guy actually went to, who's a ex-Proud Boy and a white supremacist, showed up a school board meeting somewhere in the Bay Area. And they were talking about whether the LGBTQ community should be have some counselors at the school. And he was saying, gay culture is lame and trying to take over and groom. They're trying to turn all people gay is what their big philosophy is, right? That they groom the little kids in school to become gay or transgender and confuse them. And so, he threw out the WP symbol he was on TV in the press conference, right? So he got kicked out because people got pretty upset, apparently. All right, which is good, by the way. Because in America, you can express racist views. I mean, there's no laws like the KKK was always never an illegal organization, right? What you could do as a KKK member could be illegal if you, by the way, when they were burning crosses on your lawn in front of your house, the only thing they got charged with trespassing. That was it, right? So, okay, anyhow. So use these resources to really get into the nitty gritty of whose source is better, who's more reliable, who's got biases for whatever reasons, or so the focus of the chapter, the foundation of any argument is evidence. The higher quality of the evidence, the stronger the argument. The poor quality evidence is open to counter arguments that weaken the strength of your argument. In this chapter, we looked at the challenge of sifting through the narrowest amount of evidence that's available to us. We looked at the 5 types of evidence and their strengths and weaknesses. It's important to analyze the source of the evidence. To do this, we can use the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, and the CRAP test, right? Currency, relevance. I forgot AAP. And then if the source of the evidence is the internet, checking on the domain names becomes important. And then finally, because of the growth of fake news sites, determining what is real news and what is fake news has become more and more of a challenge. So we have to actually put some time and energy into this now. Whereas before, it used to be just a put your money where your mouth is publishing world, right? So it was a lot more reliable. Although that doesn't mean that people don't have agendas. And then a lot of people say the news is the gateway, right? Like if the news covers a murder story and doesn't cover all the good things that happen in community, people get the impression the community is dangerous, right? So it's like when news, what they decide to cover in and of itself makes for very misleading presentation. And then the news has that theory, right? If it bleeds, it leads. So they always start off with blood and car crashes or murder or shootings. Because people pay attention to that, and that way, that's why I always say that the news is therefore depressing, and it's true because they usually cover the negative stuff because they do see that causes more clicks. Chapter 7, reasoning. So let's talk about the logic of our arguments. Ali Al-Masawi has written an entertaining book that includes logic, bad arguments. Here, in the words of the preface of the book, he explains the limits of logic. So you try and be logical, but there are limitations to just, logic running the world. So in closing, the rules of logic are not laws of the natural world, nor do they constitute all of human reasoning. In fact, common sense is not so common. That's a quote from Voltaire, right? And then we've got this internal debate as human beings about logic versus emotion. So I think logic's important, though. It just doesn't always. I'll give you a good example. When it comes, for me personally, like when it comes to women, logic isn't always the way to approach your relationship with a woman, if that makes sense, right? I think certain people, it works pretty well. But and that's just an anecdotal example that I'm giving. In fact, that segues well into what I'm going to talk about here for inductive reasoning, because I'm just talking about certain examples and then having a generalization based off those examples. So what's inductive reasoning? Inductive reasoning is the process of reasoning from specifics to a general conclusion, right? So illegal immigrant commits crime. Illegal immigrants are bad, right? Because I have one example of this one guy who shot Catherine Steinle and had a criminal record, right? And been multiple times deported, but just came back. Which also was another reason I'm like, deporting doesn't necessarily work because you get rid of them and they just come back, right? So it's like, that's not a great solution in my personal opinion. I'm interested in the smart wall, a drone. Instead of building like a barrier, a physical barrier, we just have drones and sensors all along the southern border. So yeah, okay. Anyhow, you have a series of facts and or observations. From all this data, you make a conclusion, or as the graphic calls it, a general rule. Inductive reasoning allows humans to create generalizations about people, events, and things in their environment. There are 5 methods of inductive reasoning: example, cause, sign, comparison, and authority. So just got to remember here is that inductive reasoning is small to big. All right, my friend Juan loves tacos. Juan is Mexican. So one example, and then I generalize, all Mexicans love tacos. I think everybody in the world loves tacos, personally, but yeah. So to kind of see that, that's an example of inductive reasoning, right? Specific to example, and then you generalize as to a rule, right? Okay. Or you might be like, my friend is Asian. She's good at math. Therefore, all Asians are good at math. By the way, who scores highest on the high school SAT? Asian girls or females. All right. So Asians are good at math. Not really true to dudes, just the ladies. Anyhow, all right. Inductive reasoning also allows people to create generalizations about events, not just people. So I could say like, this EDC was awesome. I went once. All EDCs are awesome. So I generalize as a rule, right? EDC is just always awesome because I went to one and it was awesome. And then things in the environment, right? You might say like, oh, Honda, I own a Honda. It's never broken down. Hondas are the best, most reliable car, right? But you're just basing your opinion about all of Honda based on one Honda that you're driving. There's like millions of them on the road, right? But they generally are pretty good. Toyota's number one, by the way. Toyota, Lexus, number one, same company. Number one, number two in terms of their cars last the longest and are most reliable in terms of just there. I was reading that Toyota RAV4 has more RAV4s driving with 250,000 miles on them than any other model in the whole history of the world of cars by a lot. That's pretty interesting. All right. So let's learn more about inductive reasoning. So we have reasoning by example. This includes using specific instances as a basis for making a valid conclusion. In this approach, specific instances 1, 2, and 3 lead to a general conclusion about the whole situation. For example, I have a Sony television, Sony stereo, Sony car radio, a Walkman. I used to actually own one of those, the tape player, a Sony video system, and they all work well. It is clear that Sony produces superior electronic products, right? So you have like 4 or 5 little examples, and then you go, so like, dude, by 4 or 5 Sony products are all awesome, therefore Sony period is awesome, right? Or I have taken 4 good professors at this college, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Ortiz, Dr. Willard, Miss Richard. Therefore, I can conclude that the professors of this college are good, right? So you have 4 examples of good faculty. So you say, hey, the whole faculty is good as a general rule at this college, right? So you're using specific examples to create a generalization. So number 1, there must be a sufficient number of examples to justify the generalized conclusion. How many examples are enough? So before, if I say like, EVC faculty is awesome, how many of the professors, specifically, examples do I have to have before you say that's good enough, right? I don't know. That's an interesting question, right? If I say the whole faculty is good, I'd say everybody, but Right. But a lot of people just say use 2 or 3 examples and then they generalize from there, right? So people like things simple. All right. The answer depends on the significance of the specific instances and the threshold of your target audience. So how much is enough for the audience, and then how significant are your specific instances that you're trying to generalize from? So some audience may find 1 is enough, while others may need many, many, many more. So for example, we use the Nielsen ratings to actually measure television viewing preferences of 300 million Americans. We saw on us.clock.org, there are 340 million Americans, I think, in the country right now, and literal real time, and are determined by roughly 3,000 homes scattered throughout the United States. So if you didn't know, 3,000 homes get a Nielsen TV rating box, and whatever they're watching, they extrapolate to the 300 million Americans, right? Total. So freaking super inductive reasoning. Yet the television industry, which uses them to set advertising rates, accepts the 3,000 examples enough as to validate the concerns. So, okay, so you have 3,000 homes to represent 300 million Americans. What do you think the 3,000 homes are like? They have to be a little cross section of all of America, right? So the 3,000 homes has some LGBTQ communities in it. It has families, just single guys, divorced people, just college roommates. They're all different age groups because it's got to represent all of America, right? So you can't just have all 20-year-olds, 3,000 homes with 20-year-olds, because their TV viewing habits are different from all the other different age groups, right? So, and then you're going to have equal number of men and women. There are actually, I think, about 52 to 53% women in the country and like 48, 47% male. So the 3,000 homes to represent all of us need to have about 52, 53% female. So, 1,550 homes with women or all women, or right, just to represent those numbers. And then, like, you would look at the most Americans are Christian in this country. It's like almost 80%. So 80% of the 3,000 homes should be Christian homes, where you're looking at the home, they got a cross, Jesus going on, all the stuff, right? All right, so that's how they do that, if you didn't know that. So they actually use inductive reasoning. And by the way, they ask very particular people to be a Nielsen rater, right? Because Nielsen needs them to fit this demographic representation. So there you go. All right. Now, by the way, because people do streaming, the companies can just track what people are watching a lot easier than a Nielsen box on their TV. So, all right, number 2, the examples must be typical of the whole. So is my friend Juan, who's Mexican and loves tacos, kind of a typical Mexican? I'm making Juan up, by the way. But I would say Juan is, yeah, pretty typical Mexican, not Mexican American, but Mexican, right? So I would say that he, for example, loves mola, loves soccer, more about fish tacos than the traditional kind of American style taco, right? Or the street tacos become kind of popular now too, so, right? And they're not fringe examples, right? So, for example, you come to college, you take one English class whose instructor you find disappointing. You conclude that all 300 instructors at this particular college are poor teachers from this one class, from this one department. So this sample might not be representative of the whole population of instructors, right? So again, how many professors do you need to take before we can generalize about the entire faculty, right? Okay, so number 3, important counterexamples must be accounted for. If the counterexamples mitigate against the examples used, the generalization is threatened, right? So I might think about, okay, we have this murder of Catherine Stein Lee by an illegal Mexican immigrant, but I might find counterexamples where I find, hey, these illegal immigrants came, they were in a sanctuary city, and they actually did something that was useful or helpful or something like that, right? So I'm trying to think of it. I've actually trying to think of a good example of I've read some stories about illegal people doing something that was worked up, just happened to be they like saved somebody or helped some situation, right? So and then so be an example, bad illegal immigrant, counterexample, good illegal immigrant, right? So it's like, well, what do you do when you have one example of good, one example of bad, right? So so you ask yourself also, what if a good friend of yours also took another English class and was pleased by the experience? He found that his instructor was an excellent teacher. His example becomes a counter to your example. So you're like, I think the faculty of this college suck based on my one English professor. But then your friend's like, I took this English professor and she was awesome. So then you have counterexample. You have to be weighed against it because you're only using examples to reason from as a general rule from, right? So you got to look at the examples and counterexamples. Number four, the examples must be relevant to the time period of your argument, right? So again, recency, currency. If you're dealing with something recent, you need recent examples. If you're trying to prove something in the 1850s, examples from that period are appropriate, right? If you took the English class 30 years ago, it would be difficult to draw a valid conclusion about the nature of the teachers at the college today, right? Without using more recent examples. Ratemyprofessor.com, I guess. I don't know. Likewise, recent examples may not be reflective of the way the college was 30 years ago, right? So, all right, causal reasoning. This is the second type of inductive reasoning that we see a lot. And this is basically when people see something and they say that caused this to happen, right? Because so the idea is that for every action, there's a reaction. So stated very simply, a cause is anything that's directly responsible for producing something else, usually termed the effect, right? Cause and effect. There are two forms of causal reasoning. We have cause to effect and effect to cause. So cause to effect is a known cause or causes is capable of producing some unknown effect or effects, right? If you vape, what happens long-term health? We don't know. Vaping hasn't been around long enough to actually, for us to study to really see what the long-term effects are. So you have a lot of like 20-year-olds who started vaping instead of cigarettes. And if they vape for 30 years, we'll see what happens to them. Does it cause lung cancer like nicotine cigarettes, right? Or not, or different side effects. So then effect to cause is some known effect has been produced by some unknown cause. So I feel sick and I'm like, dang, was it what I ate? Or maybe I got a flu bug or a virus, or I have COVID, right? But you know you're sick. So it's effect to cause, but you have a known effect, but you don't know what the cause was, right? Cause to effect is, I know the cause, but I'm not exactly sure what the effect's going to be exactly, right? So, all right. And you looked at homelessness, right? Homelessness and addiction. It says basically it's cause to effect and effect to cause. So yeah, all right. So the goal of causal reasoning is to figure out how or why something happened. I might say like, why did I lose my keys? Because I fucking wasn't paying attention, right, or something, or I was distracted. Or you might say something like, you're always looking for. It's really interesting, right? Just figure out what why did this happen to me, or how did I get into this series of events that led me here, right? So, for instance, you did well on a test because you studied 2 days in advance. I could then predict that if you study 2 days in advance of a test, the next test you will do well, right? Just okay. I had an effect. I did well in my exam. What was the cause? Well, I studied a bunch. So you kind of go like, yeah. So studying for tests causes you to have a good effect. Good, okay. So in causal reasoning, the critical thinker is trying to establish a predictive function, right? What's going to happen in the future because of cause and effect. So if we can figure out how and why things occur, we can then try to predict what will happen in the future. I think parents are like this. We know a lot of effects. Like if your children do this or this, they can turn out that way. So like a good simple example. My son, I'm always telling him eat, because I want him to grow bigger and taller. And this is a good time in his development. He's going to turn 8 soon, where that actually does matter. Like you need to eat to grow. And by the way, when do kids grow? When they sleep. All right. So you're always trying to predict, right? If my kid eats well, I can predict the future. He'll be big and strong and tall, which, by the way, I think there's a lot of research that says that's good for you in society, especially as a male. All right. So let's look at the tests of causal reasoning, right? And I always tell my kids also something like, if you don't wear your jacket and it's cold outside, you're going to get sick, right? Cause, don't wear a jacket, effect, get sick. That is true, by the way. They finally found that to be true, because it used to be they just said that was a parental myth, but they actually found that cold room hurts your immunity, and then your immunity system goes down, and then therefore you get more sick. So being cold doesn't make you sick, but it makes you more vulnerable to getting sick, right? So that's quite a distinction. So number one, looks at whether the cause must be capable of producing the effect described and vice versa. So let's test this cause and effect theory. That I can do that by just saying, is this cause capable of actually producing this effect, right? So if I study 10 hours in front and before the test, will I get a good test score, right? And you're like, oh, that cause doesn't lead to that effect. Because study 2 days before test leads to good test exam. You go like, okay, so cramming, not so good. 48 hours preparation, good. Number two, cumulative causal reasoning increases the soundness of the conclusion. So you kind of notice all these little cause and effect things to be true, and all together, you're kind of like, oh, yeah. Like I might say, you get what you pay for. And that's a lot of I have these causes and effects. I bought this, but then I went for the cheapo version on this one and this one. It broke after a week, and then I paid for the nice high quality version of this one, and it did last a long time. And then you buy all these products, and after a while, you're like, dude, it does. You get what you pay for. Is what you kind of realize, right? So that's cumulative causal reasoning. That buying the cheapest one isn't actually always the best idea at all, right? And number three, I don't think you should always just buy something for a brand name, like either. Just because it has the logo, like an Apple logo, doesn't make the phone better. I actually saw that yesterday because one of my friends was like, we were taking pictures, and she was like, I'm going to use my iPhone. And I was kind of like, because the other phone, I think it was an Android, I don't even know, it was someone else's phone. I was like, the Apple logo doesn't make your camera better at all, by the way, at all. It's actually a lie. That Apple logo costs you like $400, right? So anybody see the $1,000 monitor Apple stand? So it's not even a monitor, it's just a stand for your monitor. That was $1,000. So number three, yeah, I could tell you stories about Apple and why they're rich. Counter causal factors must also be accounted for. So again, you look at the counter examples and counter causes, right? So there's a great videos on YouTube where people walk into an Apple store and get charged $1,000 to repair their laptops. And then the guy takes the same laptop with the same problems and then takes it to like a repair guy who fixes it for $40 in like 30 seconds. So like Apple stores rip off their customers when it comes to the repair stuff for sure too. All right, there are two types of comparisons, figurative and literal. So literal and figurative comparisons. So literal comparisons are actually attempts to establish a link between similar classifications, like this car is like that car, or this state of, like vapors, this like fog, this type of person is like that type of person. For instance, you compare a Ford compact car with a Toyota compact car, or the lottery in one state with the lottery in another state. How your parents treat you with how your best friend is treated by her parents. In those comparisons, similar classifications are being used for the purposes to make the analogy. So literal comparisons can provide logical proof for the point being made, and thus can increase the validity of the argument, right? So your teenagers use this one a lot. They ask their parents for permission to do something, and then they're like, my other friends' parents let them, and you're in a similar category. So it's a fair comparison and to examine, right? But just because one parent believes something, lets their kid do something, and vice versa, doesn't necessarily mean I should, I don't think. But you just think about it on your own and you come to your own conclusion. So figurative comparisons attempt to link similarities between two cases from different classifications, right? So Jim Baker of the Bush 2000 campaign argued after the 5-4 Supreme Court decision awarding the state of Florida to Bush, saying George W. Bush stole the presidency from Al Gore is like saying someone tried to steer the Titanic after it had already hit the iceberg. So figurative comparisons carry no weight in terms of providing logical proof for an argument. They can, however, be very effective for the purpose of illustration and persuading an audience. So figurative comparisons don't really have any logical relevancy at all, but people kind of like them, and they're pretty persuasive, right? And I might make a figurative comparison, you dirty rat, right? Literally, you're a rodent with a tail, but what's a rat? What's a dirty rat in type the answer in the chat if you know that answer, right? Too, when in a figurative sense, and it is right. It was the original mafioso term in the 20s and 30s, right? When you had undercover informant or cop or narc in your group, they called them a dirty rat. Okay, reasoning from authority. This is the third type of inductive reasoning. So this is where you argue that a particular claim is justified because it is held or advocated by a credible source, but just one, right? Because you remember, inductive reasoning is specific to general. So that credible source can be a person or an organization. Basically, the authority possesses some credentials that qualify the source as an authority, right? Medical license, law license, CPA license. Thus, you accept the argument because someone you feel as an authority tells you so, like maybe your teacher, right? So you can use this type of argument in two ways. First, you can ask what argument is accepted simply because someone you consider an authority advocates it, right? So when I was little, I went to church, and I remember things that my church elders, the pastor of our church or my youth group would say, and because they're an authority, and if you buy into the Christian religious structure, I believe them. So people grant authority status to other people they think have more knowledge than they do, students to teachers, patients to doctors, clients to lawyers. Children often argue this way when they justify a position by saying, because my mommy or daddy said so, right? So I do see a lot of parents indoctrinating their kids politically, left or right, by the way, with guns or whatever it might be. And I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way. I live somewhere where um, people own a lot more guns than in the Bay Area, and people hunt here in Lake Tahoe. Also, people go shooting. And in Nevada, you can do hella shooting because it's a desert and it's just a really good place. Yeah, exactly, Matthew, totally. So, and you see that's a figurative association. So, yeah, it's interesting. Should you snitch on people? It's interesting, huh? Anyhow, you can use this argument again the second way. You can support your arguments with the credibility of another person, right? So here you're attempting to transfer the positive ethos from the credible source to the position you were advocating. So advertisers do this all the time when they get popular athletes or entertainments to promote their products, right? So popular athlete or movie star says, drink Pepsi, right? Because they're being paid to do that in a commercial. And the advertisers are hoping that your positive view of these people, the celebrity or the athlete, transfers to their product, that's increasing sales, right? And there's a lot of research that says that does work. Look at the Kardashian Kylie Jenner, youngest female billionaire in the world, and she makes a lot of her money by using products and then using her celebrity to sell the product, and then the advertisers pay her to do that, right? And then she's called a big influencer. And this, by the way, is the celebrity effect in America, mostly because of social media, is even bigger than it was when there was no show. You know, they used to have movie stars, rock music people, and like a couple other famous people, right? That really would be a big deal, be very influential. But social media has really become the place to become an influencer. So, and you'll see a lot of movie stars, a lot of musicians and stuff are on social media as well, right? So you may be persuaded to see a particular movie, attend a certain play, or eat at a restaurant because it was advocated by a well-known critic, right? So that could be a critic of restaurants. You know, there's a lot there. I forgot what movie it is where like this super famous food critic comes and visits their restaurant, and their restaurant's all about trying to impress the critic because they know that if she approves the restaurant, then they'll do awesome. But if she says the restaurant's bad, then a lot of people will follow her advice and not go to that restaurant, right? So, all right. So let's look at tests for reasoning from authority. So the authority number one must be credible. Right? Are they really an expert or a great critic in that field? That is, authority must possess the necessary qualifications for the target audience in order for the source to be used as justification for a point of view. If challenged, the advocate must be prepared to defend the expertise and ethos of his or her credibility. Right? So I might say, hey, I'm an athlete, drink Powerade, right? And I don't think Powerade's better than Gatorade or anything else, but they're paying me to say that, so I'm going to say that, no problem, right? So you just got to say, well, I'm an athlete. I know about hydration and electrolytes and energy drinks, so you should follow my advice, right? Just a lot of experience. I'm an expert through just massive use of the products. Number two, we have views of counter authorities must be taken into account, right? So the advocate must be aware of the other experts or highly credible sources who take an opposite position from the one being advocated, right? And so you got to say like, okay, what do other athletes or professional nutrition hydration experts say about Powerade, right? So I got to look at the counter authorities. And then number three, the cumulative views of authorities increases the validity of the reasoning. So citing more than one expert or authority will increase the likelihood that your position will be viewed as more valid. So think about getting multiple experts to say this is true, not just one, right? And because you're going to say that if I have multiple experts saying this is true, it overwhelms the one counter authority that you might have, right? Because in today's world, you've got a lot of authority generally on one side, but you'll have a couple counters to that nowadays. And those people who say the opposite are glorified because there's a side that has an agenda that needs them to say that, right? And that's because, you know, politics creates the possibility to say, I can get money, fame, connections by saying this because that side needs someone who's an expert to say it. Conclusions from inductive reasoning are always only probable, right? Juan loves tacos. Juan is Mexican. Therefore, all Mexicans love tacos. If that's true, it's only probably true, right? And at best. So to use induction effectively, an advocate must demonstrate that the specifics are compelling, this justify the conclusion, but never claim that the conclusions are guaranteed in all situations, right? Because we're just doing specific examples and then generalizing to the whole, right? So it's just always probably. So the best way to understand that is Juan loves tacos, Juan is Mexican, probably Mexicans love tacos, right? So deductive reasoning, I'm going to wrap it up at the end of this, and this is an important part here. And it's the opposite of inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is the process of reasoning from general statements, right? Mexicans love tacos. Juan is Mexican, therefore Juan loves tacos, right? And that's an example. You see how it flip-flops the induction. It goes from general to specific as opposed from specific to general, right? So deductive arguments begin with a general statement that has already been arrived at inductively. So we just know it to be true, some general statement, like all humans are mortal. Yeah, everybody who's human, they die. That is deductive general statement that is totally true, right? Because I can look at every single specific example of a human being and they all die. Unlike inductive reasoning, where the conclusion may be very valid, but it's only probable, the conclusion reached by deductive reasoning is logically certain, right? It's because like all humans die, Peter is human, Peter will die, right? That's a logical certainty. It's not probably true, it's certain true, right? So we've got a syllogism. A syllogism is an example of deductive reasoning. So it comes with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So the major premise might be like, all human beings are mortal. Minor premise, Peter is human, therefore, Peter will die, right? That's a syllogism. Major premise, general statement has already been arrived at inductively, minor premise, and then you conclude. Sherlock Holmes was a deductive reasoning expert. So if you're a person who helps remember things by association, remember Sherlock Holmes. His superpower was deductive reasoning. Everybody else in the world thinks, and it's pretty much true, they think inductively. They tend to think specific examples and then generalize to the whole. Whereas really intelligent people, because this is hard to do, they don't think inductively, they think deductively. And that's just why Sherlock Holmes was able to solve crimes that nobody else could, because everybody looks at crime inductively, but he was always looking at deductions, which are general statements or major premises that are arrived at inductively, but they're absolutely certain. Therefore, the conclusion must also be certain. Fallacies. We're going to stop here because